My name is Heather Giordano, and I am Senior Vice President of Human Resources at CNA. As part of that responsibility, I also serve as CNA's chair of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council, as well as the lead of a team that I learn from every day, which is our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion team. So on behalf of all of us here at CNA, around the world at CNA, we're thrilled to host Dive In right here from our Chicago home office for the second consecutive year. We're also thank you. We're also really proud, every single one of us at CNA around the world, to partner with and to sponsor Dive In for the 8th consecutive year. So I extend a very warm welcome to those of you here in the room. It is a packed house. It is standing room only in this room. I'm hoping we can find some more chairs. I extend a very warm welcome to everyone celebrating like we are Hispanic Heritage Month. And I also extend a very warm welcome to the hundreds of others who are joining us virtually. So welcome, welcome, welcome. CNA's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion is embodied in our Allies for Change program, which strives through partnerships, recruiting, and mentoring and sponsorships to close the underrepresented gap in diverse talent across our industry. This underrepresentation challenge is one that we as an industry share. We know that. And it's for that reason that we at CNA believe that diversity, equity, and inclusion is something on which we as an industry should collaborate. It's an issue on which we should and must collaborate, not compete. We believe in the multiplicative power and the results that we can achieve when we come together on this issue. And that's what motivates us every day as Allies for Change. So our program today here, in partnership with Dive In, reflects that aspiration and that spirit, the hope for shared, meaningful impact. We're going to start this morning with an inspiring keynote. It's going to be a rousing keynote, followed by a roundtable discussion asking all of us to really reignite our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and walk out of this room, or walk out from the session, wherever you join us in the world, with an I will statement. I will go do this. I will go be this. I will go offer this. In the same vein, you'll see the ink factory at work throughout the morning, visually representing our live conversations here in the room as they're happening, and inscribing the work that we do together as proof of our collective continued engagement and commitment on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So with that, let's begin. We've got a great program lined up. We're going to start the morning with Xavier Ramey delivering a keynote. It's a presentation titled Courage to Lead, Future-Proofing Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Insurance. Xavier is a native Chicagoan. Whoop, whoop. And Xavier is also the CEO of Justice Informed, which is a social impact consulting firm based right here in Chicago, Illinois. Xavier's an award-winning social strategist, a noted public speaker, and a conflict mediator. Today, he's a recognizable voice on the topics of community and economic development, policing and policy violence, and connecting spiritual faith to our lived experience. Through his leadership at Justice Informed, Xavier has consulted with institutions around the world on their DEI, community engagement, and philanthropic strategies. He's served as an advisor to Fortune 500 executives, provided strategic social impact guidance on multi-billion-dollar business acquisitions and impact portfolios. He's led master classes at top-ranked graduate programs in both business and executive communications. And he's delivered keynotes, like the one we're about to hear today, around the world, inspiring, informing, and catalyzing audiences just like us to take action. So it is my honor and it is my privilege to again welcome all of you, and especially to welcome and introduce our keynote speaker to 2024 Dive In, Xavier Ramey. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Ooh, we got a packed house. Just so y'all know, Carlos let me know that I should probably grab this. because it might get a little warm in here. If I start to look like a Baptist preacher, forgive me. The work of DEI, the raising up. We're going to have fun today, y'all. Good morning. This is absolutely incredible. It's a wonderful thing to be here. I'm excited about this moment that we have in time. I'm excited about the opportunities for dive in. The reality of this summit is that it's not just even in this room, right? It's happening across 30 different countries, and more than that. It's happening across hundreds and thousands of insurance professionals around the world. And what do they all come together for? A conversation about why we can't just get along. A conversation about how do we actually make sure that the promises of the work of equality can be accomplished through the businesses that we have in this world. They're here to talk about the question of traction. Why can't we seem to get more of it? Here to talk about the question of vision, and why can't we share in it together? They're here to talk about imagination, and why best practices don't always work. They're here to talk about what's next, because what's currently happening isn't meeting the bar. This morning, I want to talk to you all about what you can do to harness a couple things. One, courage. Courage. Courage is a word I don't hear too often anymore. There's a lot of empathetic words and social words, soft words, some people might call them, like love, care, courage, integrity, these sorts of things that I think would be really powerful for us to start to harness again. In this idea of courage, we have to step away from the idea of confidence. You see, in diversity, equity, inclusion, one of the challenges that we face, I believe, is that people try to be too confident before they get out there and do something. You know, in order to do something great, you have to be willing to step away from what you already know. And what you already know, you can grow your confidence in, but what you don't understand or don't know, you're going to have courage for that. You're going to have to step on the skinny branches like I did when I started Justice Informed. Entrepreneurship is no easy endeavor. Trust me, I started growing gray hairs. And they're coming. They haven't stopped. But it requires courage. It requires courage to do something that you haven't seen before. It requires courage to say, I'm not going to look at what everyone else is doing. You see, the reality is the business community, I think, has saddled itself with a horse that can't ride. One of the reasons why the horse called DEI can't ride is because people keep looking to see what everybody else is doing. And everybody else ain't doing much. And so if we set the bar at what everyone else is doing, then we'll be as slow as they are. Now, typical business practices would tell you that you want to have an edge, right? You want to have a market edge. And where do you get an edge? It's where everybody's not. It's in the spaces where they're not doing something, or it's in the spaces where they have a blind spot. It's in the gap that you find the edge. So why aren't more people attacking the edge? Why aren't they going for that? To actually be a market leader in the work of DEI. Let's talk about today a little bit about why and how this can sometimes go wrong. So the first thing I want to talk about is what's going on in DEI. You all have probably seen a lot of the headlines. Across many different companies, we're seeing a retraction in the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, whether that be the felt experience of retraction and people simply saying, like, I don't think this is as popular as it was a little while ago. Or it may be an actual retraction. For instance, the NASDAQ stocks. Across all the NASDAQ stocks, we've seen roughly a 30% drop down in headcount for DEI officers and their teams. When it comes to overall spend in the insurance industry, y'all aren't spending much on this work. Not calling any names. Just saying. We could do better. Right? But it's less than 1%. Less than 1% of the revenues of the top 25 insurance companies is actually spent on this work of DEI. And if you think about DEI as a form of people-focused innovation, you can imagine the innovation team trying to change the game and create new opportunities, new products, new services, and being straddled with less than 1% of the budget to do so. You can't make it happen. That's what's happening with DEI right now. Also, we've got a lot of confusion. What's happening right now is a lot of people are coming into this work with a lot of ambition and low skill. It's how I used to play basketball, right? This is the reality. What happens when you got high ambition and low skill? This is all the injury zone. This is injury right here. I know that, 3 knee surgeries later, right? You gotta be able to match your skill with your ambition. So if you want to do something catalytic, you're going to have to learn how to do that. You can't just fake it. People know when they come from minoritized backgrounds when you're faking inclusion. You know the felt experience of tolerance? It's a hard thing to deal with in a meeting. You know how hard it is to call someone in on something that they don't think exists, like racism? You know how difficult it is to talk about a pay equity gap when some people read some books that said that doesn't even exist? Or they saw a Facebook post and ran with it? And then they come in and unfortunately they're the senior managing director. And now here you are talking about ambition and inclusion and equity and these sorts of things. And they're stepping back and they're saying, I think we do need equity. I think we need to focus on equality. We want to focus on the destination. It's like saying I want to focus on a house and I don't go buy wood. It's like saying I want to run a race. I want to win a marathon, but I'm never going to practice. I don't commit to the work. I commit to the destination, and it should just happen for us. So what's going on with DEI? Unfortunately, DEI is the front line for this work in corporate America and around the globe. The work to ensure that women have an equitable opportunity for jobs and compensation. The work to make sure that persons with disabilities can ensure that they not only have physical access to a building, but they also have the ability to intellectually engage, to emotionally engage, and to be seen and respected for the human that they are. DEI is the front line for the work of ensuring that people of color are able to be seen for the diversity that they have. The reality that some people just think everybody's black, white, Latino, or Asian. And within those categories, there's a fractal experience of identity. This is the reality. And DEI is the work we've said is going to get us to equality. Why can't it get us to equality? Well, the way it's set up right now, it's focused on the wrong things. And I'm going to talk to you about a little bit about how we got here, what it's focused on, what the specific model is that most companies that we work with at Justice Informed are actually engaging in when they're talking about constructing a diversity, equity, inclusion strategy, why that strategy won't work, and why we need a different model, and what that model looks like. But the reason why DEI is going backwards is because it's failing. It's not working how we thought it would. And it's not because DEI can't work. It's because we're using the wrong strategies. We're starting with different definitions. We're trying to move forward before we have consensus. We're trying to talk about people rather than with people. It's become a space of adversarial communication. It's become a place where people feel like they're going there to vent rather than to build together. It's a place that's become a shelter for people who are hurt inside their workplaces. And then they go back out of their ERGs to the water coolers or to the Zoom chats to be invisibilized. And so we have this opportunity. So who heard all of that and was like, man, this sucks. This is tough. This guy's not doing, this isn't very happy. I thought this was going to be different. Right? Let me just start by saying this. When you want to get the work done, unfortunately, it's not always about how you feel. See, DEI is one of the only areas in business where you don't have to make an impact. You can show up for 3 straight years, not hit the KPIs, keep your job. DEI is one of the only spaces where, unlike sales, where if you go out and you say, hey, you know, the boss says, hey, we need to hit this KPI. We need 5 million in sales before the QBR comes up, and that's your mark this quarter. And the entire sales team goes out, tries to sell. They come back, nothing done. When the boss asks them, well, how come you didn't even sell anything? They say, well, we talked to a couple people, but it got really uncomfortable. I was really icky. I didn't feel good. They didn't feel good. It was really just kind of winding and winding. We didn't really know how to fix this, so I just left. You see how everyone's laughing? That's how we do when it comes to racial equity. It was really icky, so I left. It was really complicated, so I left. That's what we do with inclusion for women. That's what we do with inclusion for queer folks. That's what we do. It was hard, so I stopped. There is nowhere else in business where that would fly. And at the core of the mandate for DEI across the world that has been accepted by most major companies is this has to work for the business, but it's the only thing not working like a business. Why? Let's get to it. What does the world need from DEI? Let's stop talking about what business is doing or not doing. Let's talk about what we need. Can you imagine a world? Can you imagine a world where I wasn't standing up here right now? I can imagine that world. Do you know why I'm standing up here right now? Because I grew up in the North Lawndale community in Chicago. North Lawndale, some of you all may not have ever heard of it. If you've heard of Ta-Nehisi Coates, he wrote a seminal piece in The Atlantic back in 2014 called The Case for Reparations. It was about my neighborhood. And he looked at it as a case study for why America has a debt to pay as it relates to African-American descendants of slaves particularly, on the topic of reparatory work. And he came in and he detailed the pillage, as he called it. Not the lack of investment. Lack of investment is one thing. We all know about what it means to not invest in something, but divestment is different. It's when the way in which your business operates actually extracts value from the communities that one day you talk about trying to hire from. And over time, you organize those resources inside that business, create different hoops for them to jump through. Professionalism hoops, credibility hoops, academic hoops, experiential hoops, these sorts of things. And then they don't cut the mustard because the schools in those neighborhoods would never teach them algebra like the school I went to. The programs that are set up are mostly nonprofits that you just try to like piece together a couple meals and a couple programs and these sorts of things, and hopefully you make it through. And that was my teenage years. And then you grow up and hopefully you get into some college-bound program. And you get into some school that none of the top firms are hiring from. And you major in a major like economics like I did, and you get into the honors program and you realize you're the only black person that's going to graduate that year in that program. And they say it didn't even matter that you were black. You had the experience of a white person, because race doesn't affect education. Everyone can learn the same. The experience wasn't different. And then you get to that college program and you start talking to some recruiters because you want to go into accounting. You say, man, I'd love to go work at a Big Four accounting firm. And then an African-American guy who's on the ERG comes in and he talks to you about all the opportunities at the business and how they really want to bring in more people of color into this program. And he comes in and he says, but gentlemen, you're going to have to cut that hair. You're going to have to cut that hair. We got global clients here. They don't like that stuff. It hurts the bottom line. Top of my class for accounting. Honors program for economics. Something you might not know, 2-time National Poetry Slam champion. Yeah, snaps on that. I've had a way with words my entire life. The reality is I was always smart enough. I was on my first board of directors by the time I was 22. I was a director level. I was a director in an organization by the time I was 25. I had raised my first $1 million by the time I was 26. Unqualified. Unqualified. This is the reality. People like me are everywhere. Everywhere. And the experiences that we had to get to this podium played a material difference in our lives. A material difference. My cortisol rates are higher. My stress is higher. My life expectancy as a black man born out, I'm not trying to age nobody, born in 1985 in Cook County, my life expectancy is 56 years. That's the data. I'm looking at 40 with 16 years to go. Now, how the heck is an ERG going to deal with that? You see what I'm saying? The strategies we're using can't close these gaps. The problems we're facing in the world cannot be resolved with what we're doing in our workplaces. So there's got to be more. Because this is not the end, and this certainly isn't mine. There's got to be more. And this is the hope that I want to bring to you all today, and why we're talking about courage. Because if you want to have courage, you're going to have to stop going into your office and talking about, well, what's the other company doing? You got to go back to WTW and you can't say, well, what are they doing over there at Liberty Mutual? You got to go over there and you got to talk to the people in your ERG. You got to talk to the people in the DEI council. You got to talk to your senior leadership team and say, we got to stop looking outside. We could actually win something here. We could lead something here. The game is completely open. It's completely open. The market is completely open. Who wants to lead? Who wants it? It is up for grabs. Name the best company in America for inclusion. Name the company that knows everything about equity. You look at their Glassdoor ratings, that's all the people who left are talking about, how great their programs were. We don't know, where is that company? Who are they? I'm not saying this to shame anybody. I'm saying this to call us in. I'm saying because the game is wide open. So let's get to it. And the world needs better. I can imagine a world where I would never be standing here. But that world doesn't exist. Because instead of going into finance, instead of staying in my job at the mercantile exchange as a commodities trader, I got out, I didn't do the accounting route, it got a little boring. But I went into commodity trading and I had a real black experience. And I know that the folks there didn't think that. They didn't imagine that, but I did. I had to deal with the microaggressions before that word existed. I had to deal with the language about my people that they would casually talk about over lunchtime. I had to listen to an entire room of mostly men tell me they would never go to North Lawndale because the hood ain't worth nothing. And that's where I'm from. And I love everything about it. We write off entire populations of people, and then we create goals to hire them somehow. How is that ever going to work? The world needs more. Let's talk about why we've got a diversity problem. This is just insurance. So the insurance industry has about 2.8 million professionals working in it right now across the United States. 70% of those jobs are entry level. Of those demographics, roughly 78% of insurance professionals identify as white, 13.2% identifies black, 12% identifies Latina, and 6.4% identify as Asian. Now, for some of you all, you may say, well, let's match this to population, right? Like, let's make sure that we have a representative sample here. And I would say that that may not be the way we get to equity. That's how we get to equality. Right, that's starting the line and understanding that if we just match it to let me give you something that former Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. She was approached after a panel, and Justice Ginsburg was asked, and I think it was a bit of a little chest pop somebody was trying to give her. Well, Justice Ginsburg, you talk so much about diversity. How many women do you think need to be on the Supreme Court before you would say it's inclusive? Justice Ginsburg thought, she had that thinking look, that little smile she would do. And she said, I'd say 9. And he said, well, 9? Well, that's all the seats. That's not inclusion. Now, she didn't say the rest, but I'm going to fill in the blanks for what I think she meant. She would say, I know. That's equity. You see, in order for Justice Ginsburg to be a woman justice, we have to imagine that that's a rare thing. In order for there to be a woman Supreme Court justice, we have to be able to imagine and live in a world where that is unpredictable, where that is unlikely. And so when a woman does hold that role, she's not a Supreme Court justice, she's a woman justice. And so how do we deal with the reality of how our brains work? And if any of you all have taken an unconscious bias class, you know there are many different forms of bias. One of them is confirmation bias. One of them is recency bias. These sorts of things are our brains working against us. And the reason why she said 9, and I agree with her, is because what it would take to normalize women at the highest level of our judiciary would be likely generations of them all at once. And perhaps sometime in 2075, there's some young lady who's born right now, and she'll rise to that rank, and she'll be exactly what you are when you have privilege and you're seen as normal, invisible. She'll just be another justice. That's the future we're trying to work towards, where it was actually her merit, not her identity. But what does it take for the rest of us when we have to see something over and over and over again to normalize it? When we have to see something over and over and over again to think that it's okay? When a person walks into our workplace and they're the one of 3 people of color in the last 6 months hired, and we're like, all these diversity hires. We would have to keep normalizing it. We wouldn't be able to start with just equality to deal with the fact that we haven't had it for generations. And that's not because equality is a bad thing. It's because that's unfortunately how humans work when they don't want to let go of the power that they've always had. That's how it works. That's an unfortunate reality, but that's what the world needs. That's how Justice Ginsburg thought about diversity. And I think she was going with something. Now, some people would call that exclusion. Some people would say that that's reverse sexism. I want to offer up to you, if the goal is to change the way our society works and the opportunities for all people, then we have to look at a scaled strategy. And what your one company is doing is not just about your one company, it's about the entire sector boiling up to a different reality in the years to come. And insurance companies would need to start working together. They would need to start working together comparatively with their data, comparatively with their strategies. Right now, one of my favorite projects we're working on at Justice Informed is actually with a lot of the banks here in Chicagoland. It's called the Advancing Equity in Banking Commission. In 2020, the Chicago Treasurer and the Illinois State Treasurer, they reached out to Justice Informed and they said, we want to consider a different definition for racial equity. We're looking at all these commitments in 2020 and we want to make sure something happens. Can you all facilitate these roundtables? Can you deal with some of these executives? Can you invite them to the table? Can you manage the conversations? Can you get them to agree? And after 4 years of working with the likes of JP Morgan and Northern Trust and Huntington and Wintrust and other banks here in the region, what we walked away was seeing, man, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of investment happening. Billions of dollars going into this. Billions of dollars going into this. And my question, I step back and I say, how come Lawndale looks the same then? Why does it still look the same? With billions of dollars going into the problem. Why does it still look like that? When we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, how come I don't see a lot of people with 60624 zip codes in the staff census? How come a lot of them have West Loop and Streeterville and these sorts of neighborhoods? Where's the inclusion with the city? But then you come to realize that as people get opportunities individually, they go and segregate the city themselves. They take those wages and they go right back home. And then they invest in echo chambers. They only go to churches where we don't talk about this. They send their kids to schools that don't have programs about this. They make sure the PTA meeting isn't about this. And then they start to think that life doesn't need to be about this. The same thing happens with business associations and communities. I go to a lot of association meetings. And eventually, as the conversation isn't heard, that confirmation bias issue pops in and people start thinking that because it's true for them, it's true for everyone. And they think because it's not a problem for them, it must not be a problem for anyone. And then that starts to get normalized and standardized. And those 12% of Latinx people working in insurance across 2.8 million professionals start really feeling like they are the diversity hires. When what they really are hyper qualified, incredibly brilliant, ready, willing, and able drivers of the bottom line of this nation itself. But linguistically, they may not be talked about that way. And part of that is the way that we socialize, not just in our offices, but when we leave them. Not just the 9 to 5, the 5 to 9. And so I want to move to inclusion, but I want to ask you all this question. Is this personal? Is this personal for you, or is this corporate? Is it personal? I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't personal. This is personal. This is personal. If we get this right, I live longer. I live longer if we get this right. And if we don't, people like me don't. Those are the stakes. And I have a big stake in this bet. So we have to get this right. We have to do this. We have to understand that we have to move beyond the diversity problem. Even just for my sake. But then we have inclusion confusion. See, 78% of insurance professionals identify as white. 59% of the industry employees are women. This is a very gender diverse industry. Far more than finance. Far more than the top lines of healthcare. But when we start to break that out, that's 78% of insurance industry folks who identify as white. Roughly only 8 to 14% of those are men of color. You know, I've been doing professional DEI work at Justice Informed for the last roughly almost 8 years. And I've been working in social impact for the last 20. I have never been asked in my life, never in my life, how do we get more men of color involved? How do we promote more men of color into these jobs? I have never been asked that. Never. We work with Fortune 500s, Ingredion and Emerson. We work with big foundations like the MacArthur Foundation. We work with little tiny nonprofits and the Taproot Foundations and Girl Forward and these sorts of things. I've never been asked the question about men of color, and I am one. And that's why I say, it's personal. It's personal. Things get better if we do this better. For every manager opportunity, for every 100 men that are promoted, 104 women are promoted. The work that had to be done, because 30 years ago, anybody here worked in the industry for more than 20 years? We got quite a few. Were there this many women? I've seen a lot of no's. There were not this many women in the industry 20 years ago. 2004, it wasn't like this. 1984? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Look at the traction. Is 104 for every 100 a race? Are we racing? Or is this what Justice Ginsburg said? We're trying to standardize and make normal the presence of women in the workplace. And that is going to require us to temporarily even just over-index for a bit. The guys have been on the mic for a while, and here's another one. Let's keep going. We haven't even gotten to equity yet. Let's talk about the highest levels of leadership. Boards of directors. 40% of insurance companies have board of directors representation with women. 2% of those are women of color. 2%. 14% are men of color. Across C-level executives, let's go down to the staff level. 85% of them identify as white. Across industries, black workers, this is just talking about sentiment. Black workers are 2.5 times more likely to say that their employer needs to pay more attention to DEI versus their white counterparts. I know I'm focusing on race and gender because that's where we got a lot of our data. And part of that is also an issue of inequity. The reality of disability justice becoming a conversation, mostly only when the American with Disabilities Act was passed, is a present example of the ways in which inclusion creates more data, and that creates more strategies for the people who are not allowed in. We can do better. We can do better. So across these two primary categories of diversity engaged by most DEI-enabled companies, race and gender diversity is clearly happening, but racial diversity is not. And things are getting harder. How are they getting harder? They're getting harder because the conversations feel more tense right now. 2024 is a radically different year for this work than 2020. A radically different year. And it's not because the work isn't worth doing. It's because there are people who are actively against it. You all have seen the headlines. Tractor Supply, Lowe's, Ford, others, all retracting, dissolving their DEI departments. Universities have shed roughly 1/3 of their staff across the board since the Students for Fair Admissions Supreme Court decision was made in 2023. What does this mean for those of us who believe? It means we got to lock in. It means we got to lock in. It means we got to get smarter. When people ask me, what's the difference between doing this work in 2019 versus 2024? I always tell them, in 2019, it was hard to get partners to do this work. It was really tough. 2018, 17, 16, it was tough getting folks in on this. Most folks, when I left the University of Chicago, my last job when I had a W-2, I was the head of social innovation and philanthropy for the University of Chicago. My job was to go out and identify strategies that bridged public policy, so the government sector, the business sector, and the nonprofit sector. And instead of them going out and saying, business does this, nonprofits do that, government does that, we know that these things all interrelate. This is why businesses that say they don't want to get political have government affairs departments. Right? Like, we know these things intersect. And so we need the projects and ideas that can really move us forward, right? And that was my last job. But the reality is things were a little bit easier in retrospect back then because most of the folks who didn't like DEI didn't know much about it. 2020, they went and ran and read all the Ibram X. Kendi books they could. They were forced into those unconscious bias trainings, and they were, swallowing down that white fragility book. They're responding to surveys. They learned. They got the guidebook. They got all the X's and O's. They were reading our stuff. And so what's 2024? We got scared friends and educated enemies. It's tough. It's tough. But it's still possible. But it's tough. We have to be real about that. It's tougher. The reality is this is a conversation that's on headlines at an exponentially higher rate than it was 4 years ago. The average person knows more about what DEI sounds like than they do about what DEI should be like. And they are running forward with their assumptions. They're running forward with their opinions. They are combating your incredible intelligence with their thoughts. And somehow, we're losing ground. How can we lose ground when we wrote the books? How can we lose ground when we've been co-chair of 3 different DEI councils? How can we lose ground when we're the ones that suggested the pre-reads for the meeting? How can we lose ground when we're the ones who authored the strategy? How are we losing ground? How are we losing ground? Courage. A desire to keep comparing ourselves to each other rather than doing what is possible for ourselves. There's this quote that I love, and it's one that I operate on. It says, each produces according to their capacity and receives according to their need. That is an incredibly un-American quote. And I'm not saying that as an indictment on America. I'm just saying that America is not about equity. It's about equality. Right? Each produces according to their capacity. When my girlfriend comes to my house, it is my job to reach everything on the top shelves. And I do a good job. It's my job. No step ladders in here. I'm in service. Right? That's equity. Producing according to my capacity. I'm 6'5". It doesn't look like that from down there, I know. Yeah, but it's here. Right? Produces according to capacity and receives according to their needs. I have a hard work that I do. She works in tech sales. Her job is different. Very different. And she knows that when we meet up, Xavier's probably had a significantly more emotional day than her. Trying to move the corporations of America, trying to invite the nonprofits and the foundations to a more rigorous definition for equity. It's a little bit more emotional, so what does she do? She makes a lot of space for me. But you know what that means? That means she understands that we're in a relationship. And why can't we do DEI better? Because people are saying they're not in a relationship. I don't know that person. I don't live next to that person. They're not my concern. We look at Dr. King's quote when he says, we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, and we say, yeah, I don't think so. Are we all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality? Is what's happening right now in Ukraine caused by us? Is what's happening right now in Israel and Palestine caused by us? Is the hunger in Sudan connected to the US? Is the lack of insurance for women-led households across much of the developing world because of the way we do insurance here in America? Are we connected or not? That is the first question every single person has to answer before they start talking about DEI. Why would you talk about how we do something together if you don't think we are? Why would you talk about trying to bring more people of color into the workplace if you actively choose not to live around them for a reason? We deny the presence of our relationships. That's the tough rub. We deny the presence of our relationships, and so we deny power in the strategies to create better ones. And if we would agree that we're connected, then we could do the work of connecting something. Well, what we're actually doing right now is we agree that we're kind of connected, and maybe we're connected. If you work here and I work here, then we got to deal with each other because, got to get a paycheck. And the reality is let's figure out how we can at least make each other comfortable. Well, that's not the same thing as equity and inclusion. That's not the same thing, and that's why things are getting harder. We now have folks who are saying, I don't want to be in relationship with those folks. I don't want it. I am actively making a decision that I don't want to be in that type of a proximity to some folks. I don't want to see them for who they are. I don't want to acknowledge how they identify. I don't want to engage them here. I didn't come to work for that. And this brings us to one of the central challenges. The work we don't do back home is now being done at work. That's a dangerous recipe. And now put on top of that compensation. You're paid to do it. The little things. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? How many here have kids? What are your KPIs this quarter? Just saying, just looking for some traction. What's the strategy? Right. How many here have more than one kid? Yeah. Can you do the same thing for your second kid you did for your first? Yeah, it doesn't work like that. People are nonlinear, and they have the right to choose. Right? And that kind of kicks in right around 0. Right? Like, that's people. And so we have these linear strategies. If you do this, then you get that. When the reality is the strategies have to be quadratic and perhaps even quantum. They have to be far more complex, far more three-dimensional. So how are most DEI strategies organized? What is the solution that we've bought? Now, this is an actual model that's sold by one of the big 4 consulting firms. I'm not going to name names. Maybe. They know who they are. I've had to go in, and our team has had to go in and clean up this strategy so many times. I want to talk to y'all about why it doesn't work. And it's making them millions, if not billions. First, it's called a maturity model. Anyone ever heard of that? Yeah, I see some heads. Now look at y'all. Look at y'all done bought the sauce. Y'all bought the sauce. Uh-huh. No, this is a dry rub conversation. All right. All right. It's Chicago. Let's talk about maturity models. The most utilized model for establishing a DEI strategy is using what's known as a maturity model. The core promise and goal of the maturity model is full employee consensus and DEI program participation. We're going to get you involved. Right? The first goal of a traditional maturity model for DEI is that all employees and stakeholders across the entire organization are aligned with and participating in DEI-focused programs. The second goal is that DEI program participation is being integrated and measured across all programs, across all departments, and tied back to the core services, products, and financial bottom line of the organization. Y'all are familiar with this, right? All right, let's keep moving then. The goal is to progress along this maturity model. It starts with compliance. It moves into this programmatic focus, then it moves into a manager focus, and then the big coup de grace, of course, is full integration. But how does that actually play out? It starts with this compliance focus, right? The intention is let's establish some minimums. Let's make sure that we are aligned to our EEOC obligations. If we're a bank, let's make sure that we are able to pass our Community Reinvestment Act evaluation with the Federal Reserve, right? Like, it's the question of the statutory regulations that we have to make sure that we're aligned to be in compliance, to keep working. The leadership model for this is mostly just educating company and organization leaders on what the mandatory regulations are and ensuring that the organization is in legal compliance. Once that happens, something then happens with the employees. They're like, well, you're just trying to check the box. You're just checking the box. Why are you checking the box? And so what do the leaders say? Let's get some programs. Let's get some initiatives. Let's do something, right? They start establishing programs. The leadership of the organization then comes in and they say, who's interested? Qualified? Unqualified? Everybody in, right? Are you in sales? You should do DEI. Marketing, right? You should talk about DEI. Come on over here. Are you an intern? Get over here, right? This is what starts to happen, right? Developing these initiatives and programs, that's the focus of this second area of the maturity model. And then once they get all these people involved who don't have this job, and once they get all these folks together who never went to school for this, and once they get all these people together who are literally the embodied definition of high ambition, low skill, they then say, what is going on here? What's the strategy? How do we tie this together? Who's in charge here? Then they start saying, well, DEI is really about people, right? It's about people. They anchor on the D part, the diversity part, because that's really measurable. I and E are tougher. And so they start saying, this is really about people. And so let's make this about people. The accountability and measurement side of this for DEI initiatives are then tied to the bottom line for anyone in a people management focused position. So they make this the responsibility not of just anybody and everybody, but specifically people managers. We need you to make sure that those candidate slates are diverse. We need you to make sure that these people feel included. We need to make sure that these employee engagement scores are going up. And as a people manager, it is your responsibility to make that happen. And we're going to give you 2 unconscious bias trainings. And if you come to this pizza meeting, you can get a raffle for a hat. It works. It works, y'all. It works, and it's working. All right? That's the 3rd level, right? Let's get somebody in charge. Let's get something to do. From there, we move to integration. These people managers are exhausted. They are tired. This isn't even their job. They're middle management. They ain't paid enough to do this. Nobody's paying for the professional development. They're trying to get into that Cornell certificate program, and nobody's going to approve that on AR. Right? Like, this is the problem. I know I'm speaking to folks because y'all are looking like you got hurt in your eyes. Y'all have been through this. Some of y'all look like what you've been through. Right? The goal here at this point of the maturity model is to establish full employee consensus and program participation. The leadership model for this is that the DEI leader is hired. We're going to hire somebody, and we're going to give them a perceived level of high influence, low resources, limited executive power, and we're going to put all accountability on them to standardize all of our programs, all of our practices, and track engagement using a strategy for organization-wide DEI that they probably didn't build. Right? There's a third-party consultant that came in and built that. That's usually how this works. And if you can get to 4, oh my goodness. Oh, the problems you'll see. There are predictable gaps in this maturity model, and it is created between the actual outcomes versus the intentions of the model. The intentions are good, but the actual outcomes are not. The promise here is for full employee consensus and program participation. The problem, this desired state is impossible to attain. We have a presidential election coming up in the United States. Do you know what level of consensus we need to have to elect the president? 50.1%. And this thing is going at 100. That's not how boards work. I'm on 3 boards of directors right now. Quorum is usually about 60%. Decision making, we implicitly understand that everyone's not going to agree. So if the goal is everybody's got to agree, we're never going to hit it. And so the model is bankrupt from the start. In the ideal scenario, an organization goes through all 4 stages of the entire model, and then they become finished with DEI. The problem is, once they reach that point, the organization predictably finds that everyone doesn't agree. Internal and external market changes were more dynamic than the model allowed for, because they weren't thinking about how the market would change or how leadership might change and not be as interested. They didn't bake that into the strategy. It was just about getting people to go along and getting them engaged and looking at these employee engagement scores hopefully going up and the inclusion diversity scores going up as well. The investments in DEI didn't lead to some dramatic innovation and change in their market share. And the data says that DEI initiatives are quote unquote not working. They then make a false assessment that DEI initiatives don't work and are an impossible endeavor. That's where we are right now. What should we be looking at? We should be looking at something that actually can attack the problem. If participation is the goal, then why across the Fortune 500s and the 90% of them that have employee resource groups are only 8.5% of their employee populations actually involved? How are you going to create systemic change with 8.5% of the people involved? And your goal is 100. You are short 91.5%. You are missing the mark. Participation and engagement will not create structural or systemic change in the organization, or systemic change in our world. There has to be something better. This is why Justice Forum, we talk about this across the spectrum. A social impact spectrum for inclusive organizational design and health, where we look at defined understanding, engaged and rooted practices, and institutionalized accountability as separate areas of work. If we jump in and start talking about what does it mean to define understanding, why do we need to define understanding? Because one of the core problems with DEI right now is that it is incredibly divisive. It is incredibly divisive. And people can stop or stall out a meeting just by saying, I don't like it. And organizational leaders don't have the communication strategies, nor do they have the operational strategies to know when can I move forward and how do I move forward if everyone's not going to agree. And so there has to be an entire area of work that actually focuses not on agreement, but on establishing consensus. Just like boards work. 60%, just like presidential elections work, 51.5. What's your number? What's enough? What's enough to move forward? Because if your company says from the top line on their website, we believe this is the work we must do, then corporately you've already said it must happen, which presupposes an assumption that you want traction. And traction is not missing the mark by 91.5%. So you have to then look at the area of understanding as its own body of work, not the work. Where is it seen as the work? Where all you're doing is trainings. Where all you're doing is coming to this conference and hear me talk. And you go home and you're like, I did DEI. Right? You go back, this guy's dynamic. Oh gosh, he was making jokes, he was really serious, he talked about dying. It was a very varied keynote. Right? Like it was a little all over the place, but I think he was saying something. Right? Like, this is not doing DEI. This is doing the work of defining your level of understanding and commitment and participation in it. That's what this is doing, like all learning. I got a degree in economics. Do I work for the Federal Reserve? No. You can learn all day and never do anything with it. And that's why DEI cannot be about learning. It cannot be about trainings. It does not produce an outcome that it does not intend to produce. Learning increases capacity. It does not guarantee movement. It increases capacity. Filling up a car with gas is not the same thing as driving it. So what do we do when we start to drive? We move from establishing clear definitions, a clear vision that's defined on paper, and measurable organizational consensus. From there, we start talking about, okay, what do we need to change inside? This is where we start talking about engaged and rooted practices. What are the workplace policies, the culture and identity informed practices and norms? What are the strategies, goals, and milestones, not the initiatives, programs, and activities, strategies, goals, and milestones? What are the incentives and consequences for not doing it? Like I said, a sales team can't walk in with 0 sold for 2 straight quarters and just say it was uncomfortable and expect to keep that job. We don't have that type of an ethic with this work. So what are the incentives and what are the consequences? And then alignment of the core business back to DEI. Not how do we do a DEI program? How does our company produce equity as an output of our work? Not how do we do equity when we're doing work? How is this company organized from the ground up, from the bylaws, the operating agreements, the shareholder statements, these sorts of things, the way in which we designed the organization from the bottom up? Does that or does that not produce equity? And if it doesn't, it's not a sustainable business for the 21st century. Because it will necessarily produce more exclusiveness as a product of its going concern. Once we start talking about how do we change the internal mechanics, the design strategy of our business, we then move into this question of how do we not lose this? Y'all know what it takes to get any inch on this football field called DEI. You got to fight for every single yard. And so when you're doing this work, there has to be an entire body of work that is about institutionalizing it. You all know what happens when that person who's an employee, executive sponsor of the out at whatever company changes jobs, and then all the traction is lost. Where the CEO comes roaring in, and they're like, we're doing this work, we are doing this work, and then 3-4 years later, they're gone. You lose all of that. So part of the work has to be in the institutionalization. When we say that we want to make our business about DEI, it can't just be about driving a bigger bottom line. It has to be about changing the very fabric of the institution so that there is longevity from the investments you've been making over time. The attrition that many organizations see when there's executive turnover is not because they didn't like their job, it's because an entire culture wave just left. An entire permission to be themselves just walked out the door. That's why that happens. So institutionalization has to be its own area of work, not just employee engagement. And that work is where we start to look at what are the standard operating procedures for how we understand and engage the work of culture and identity here. We worked with one client where I had to tell the managing director of a consulting firm, and I told him, I was like, I don't think you understand that it's going to be very difficult for you to hire people who are of the Muslim faith. He looked at me, he's like, what are you talking about? Why would Muslims not work here? I was like, your core business model, your business development strategy for how partners go out and get business, drive business, is through relationships. Many of you know that relationships are the currency to sales in many ways. And I had to be very clear with him about the reality that after some observation and surveys, we had found that much of the business development was happening through employer-sponsored drink experiences. And I'm like, well, it's one thing to say, well, you don't have to drink, you don't have to drink. But when we understand that the way that you're evaluating whether a business, whether someone is selling something, and the way in which you incentivize that is based off of relationships built around this, you now have a culture. And I just want to remind a lot of y'all that religion is the only form of identity enshrined in the Bill of Rights. And it is one of the greatest blind spots for most companies. This is the reality, but that's something that's baked into the culture. So when I say standard operating procedures, this is what I mean. How do we do biz dev here? Because that's going to be linked to promotions, advancements, bonuses, these sorts of things. And that's going to be linked to the ways in which those folks bring that money home, likely to a segregated neighborhood that needs that person of color to have a high wage. All right, like this is where we're at. Ongoing assessment, committing to not just saying we're going to build a strategy, do an assessment, but you have to evaluate that in a regular cadence. Ongoing learning and development. As people transition in and out, you have to have a strategy for ensuring that your onboarding is actually visible to the people who need to understand that the DEI work of this company is something that we cannot lose. Scaled resources. Like I said, of the top 25 insurance companies in America, there is not one that is spending more than 1% on this. And they're looking for some catalytic change. And then collective decision making. This is tough. This is a tough one. One of the things I love about Justice Informed is I try really hard to make it a business that I think business should have been in the first place. One of the things we instituted was equal bonuses. I make the same bonus as an analyst. That affects my life. How does that make me feel? Do I feel less than? Do I deserve more? I bring in most of the money. I'm driving most of the sales. I'm working 10, 12 hours a day. But the reality is, let's go back to what this mantra was. Each produces according to their capacity. I produce that because I can. And I love this. Each receives according to their need. Why would I handicap a 23-year-old when they're just starting their career? So I don't care about the market analysis because the market wasn't set up to do equity. I don't care about the competitive analyses and I know this may sound a bit radical, sometimes even the pay equity work. Pay equity audits are for folks who don't have a conscience about compensation. That's there to establish a law so that we can force a minimum. Why wouldn't you just do it anyway? Right? These sorts of things. And how is the work of the maturity model actually visibilizing any of this? We need a different way of looking at it, and looking at it across all 5 areas of an organization: the people and culture, the leadership, the marketing and comms, the policies, ops, and finances, and the primary services of that organization. So what does the world need from insurance companies? It needs somebody to lead. And that's going to take courage. It needs somebody who's willing to step away from the sauce that we've all been buying around employee engagement activities, ERGs, BRGs, DEI councils. Let's get some surveys, let's get some keynotes. And we got to get into the actual way that we built the business. We got to get into the inside of this. We got to get into the documentation. We got to get into the why and the what, and then get to a how. That's what the world needs from insurance companies as it relates to this. What does the world need from DEI advocates? Let's step back. Everybody here, yeah, y'all work for a company, but you are also people. You're individuals who have an incredible opportunity. And what it needs from you all is to know that even if you go back to your company today and they're not doing it, how will you take the work of urgency forward? How will you be more specific? How will you step away from the sauce of employee engagement as the greatest idea DEI could never accomplish? How will you do that? How will you do that? Is this personal? How will you do that? Because you can do that. Now imagine a sustainable world built from sustainable companies that chose to do something different. I'm going to end this how I started it. The market is wide open. Who wants some? What is yours to do in the world? In the world now. That's 3 questions, y'all. 3 questions. 1, what is yours? Each produces according to their capacity. What is yours? I'm tall, I get the top shelf. I'm male, I speak out about this. I was telling my team, I've been specifically going around and talking to conservative men to understand why they're voting the way they're voting this season. Because I don't expect my team to do that. Most of my team is people who identify as women and folks who identify as queer. And those conversations are going to be far more challenging and likely traumatic to them. So it's my job to step in that because our work starts where our privilege starts. That's what's mine. But to do, what is yours to do with what you have in this world? Accurately understanding what is happening, accurately assessing what you have, and then meeting that with some work and action. And doing it now. That's your job when you get home, y'all. That's your job when you go back to the workplace. Let's have some good water cooler talk. Let's throw some stuff in the Slack chats and see what happens. Thank you. Y'all have a wonderful day. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you.
Wow. My gosh. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Amici. I am Business Development Manager at Chubb. I am Latina. My pronouns are she, her. I am white, big brown eyes, black curly hair. I'm wearing a black blazer, white t-shirt with a beautiful diving logo. So I'm a big fan. You just got a big fan here. I'm speechless. And so glad to be here on behalf of diving team to say thank you, Xavier. Thank you so much. Your insights inspired us a lot and for sure make an impact in our industry. Also, I would like to congratulate and thank each volunteer, each local sponsor, global sponsor. You all made this special event happen. Also, I would like to thank you all for being here in person and virtually as well. We appreciate so much your enthusiasm and support. A special congratulations to Diving Festival for an amazing 10 years supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion around the world. So yes, we have made a lot of progress so far, but it's a lot of work to do ahead of us. So let's keep the momentum and register for the next other great virtual events that we have today and tomorrow. We have the QR codes right here. Just scan it. Oh, do not forget to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. Thank you again, all of you. Very much appreciate. Enjoy Diving 2024.
Hold on, folks. Hold up.
We have more.
Yeah, hold up. There's more. We actually want to get y'all a little interactive before you head out. We've got another hour left before the summit is all done, and we want to spend this hour actually talking together. So I'd love for you all to consider some of the points I was raising around, one, the model that we're adopting. Secondly, the question of what your why is and what your work is, and whether and how and if it's personal. These sorts of things. That is, okay, Ink Factory, y'all, wow. Round of applause for that. Oh my goodness. That would look very different if I did it. So what we're going to do is everybody here is at a round table. We want you to interact with the people at your table. I'm going to ask a couple questions, and I'd love for you to take some time to really unpack it. I can imagine that some folks are having some various thoughts about some of the points I raised, and I just want to remind you all that all of this is an invitation. It's not an outing. It's not an attack. It's not that. It's just saying, like, y'all, there's so much work to do. And this work is good work. It's good trouble. It's hard work. That's also hard work, right? And I'm encouraging and calling you all to it. So with the folks at your table, I want you to consider these questions. I feel. Finish the sentence. I understand. There's a difference between what you're feeling and what you now understand. Draw that distinction. I am confused by. I do not understand. And let's finish there. I feel, I understand, I am confused by. Choose one of those. Talk amongst your folks at the table. Let's take 20.